taking this bigger picture look at your content and across your year, you see connections, you see patterns, you see shortcuts, you see ways of making your life easier.
Hi there, it's me, Mike Vardy, the host of the Productivityist podcast, and I would like to introduce you to my friend Janet Murray. She's the guest on this episode, and she helps business owners build their audiences. She's a good friend of mine that I've had the opportunity to hang out with at conferences in the Philippines, in Nashville, and in the UK, which is where she's based. And I wanted to have her on the show to talk about big picture planning. We get into content planning, which is what she really focuses on. But as you're listening to this, I want you to think about the big picture planning outside of the scope of that as well. I mean, if you're not planning content necessarily, the principles and the tactics that she provides you on this episode can help you in other areas of life as well. So I'm really excited to get to this conversation. I know you are too, so let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Janet Murray here on the Productivityist podcast. This is long overdue. We've known each other for several years now, and I've never had you on the show, so I'm really happy that we were able to make this happen. I mean, we have quite a time difference between us, but nonetheless, it's great to have you because I know that you that's listening right now, there's a lot that we can talk about revolving around planning. And I'm a big fan of planning. And I want to first kind of set the table for people who are listening and let you introduce who you are and what's your background and how did you get to where all of a sudden you and I meet in the Philippines and then we hang out in the UK and in Nashville and all that stuff. Like, what's that origin story kind of look like?
My background, so I'm Janet Murray, and my thing is helping people with audience growth and content marketing. So I help small business owners, generally entrepreneurs, to get more followers, more fans, more subscribers. And in order to do that, generally, it's about creating engaging content and planning great content. Like many business owners, I totally fell into it by accident. And I actually started off, I'm on my third career, I think it is now. So I started off as a teacher. So I first trained as a teacher here in the UK and worked in secondary school, so teenagers. And, I didn't dislike it, but I felt like I was working really long hours. I don't know what it's like where you are, but teachers work very hard in the UK. And I was just working every weekend and every evening. So I went off and retrained in journalism. So I did that for, best part of 20 years, I think it was. And I was freelancing for national newspapers and magazines, and The Guardian was the main one that I worked for. And it just really happened by accident. So I was getting approached by people who were kind of in my world, who were asking me to do training and consultancy around, at the time, it was like getting into the press. So like, show us how to write a press release, show us how to get the attention of journalists. And this was really quite well paid compared to journalism, which isn't very well paid unless you've got one of the top jobs. And I thought, how can I get more of this really lucrative work? So I thought, you know what, I'll start a blog and then people will find me online. And then I started doing this blog. And of course, the people who knew me already, they liked my blog and they found it useful. But how was I going to get it in front of new people? So I started to learn about things like search engine optimization and building my email list and social media. And I started to learn, basically back then, didn't know that's what I was doing, about building an online audience. So the advice I can give to my clients is you might want to teach a particular thing, but actually, you can only really do what people will pay you for. So at the time, people seemed very keen to pay me to help them to learn how to get press coverage and how to deal with journalists. So I ended up writing a book. I was speaking about it. I started a podcast. All kind of by accident. I just got into this rabbit hole and just got deeper and deeper and deeper. And I was falling a little bit out of love with journalism. So I decided to try and kind of move out of that. And moved into this business where I was teaching people how to get press coverage and started a membership site and selling online courses and digital products. And then I pivoted since then. And so now I basically teach people how to build online audiences. So that's generally teaching them about social media, about content marketing, about email marketing, building an email list. And I have quite a big membership program called Build Your Online Audience. I also have a planner, which we'll probably get to talk about. Totally again by accident. I'm probably the most unlikely person in the world to launch a physical diary and planner, but there's a whole story behind that, and it is linked actually to my journalism background. And I have another membership that goes with that, and I'm also a speaker and a podcaster, and yeah, just the whole thing happened by accident, but day to day I'm generally running my membership and speaking and presenting and teaching people how to build an audience online. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Well, and before we hit the record button, we were talking about the idea of planning. And, I mean, obviously when you are moving from, vocation to vocation and the journey, I mean, we've seen that diagram where it's like what people think the journey is like and what it actually is like. But we talked about the planner a bit. I actually have the planner because you gave me the opportunity to speak at your event, Sorted. And I'm the type of person that would have a planner. In fact, we do have one that we're working on, and we have a downloadable, like what we call the daily driver, and it's more it's broader, right? Like it's about the to-do list stuff and things that you need to do. This is definitely more driven around, like you said, it's a social media diary and planner. So it's driven around content. But as we were talking about the idea of planning. And one of the things that you and I, we when it comes to planning, I'm that detail guy. Like I'm the guy that can get deep in the weeds and say, okay, well, you need to break this down and break this down. But as we were talking, you're like, it's the big picture stuff that really, that's the stuff that you kind of help people with and that really you excel at, right?
Yeah. So it was all, again, accidental. But when I started doing business online and started promoting my own business online, I noticed something. I noticed that content was it was easy for me because I was from a journalistic background, and as a journalist you work from a planner basically. And there's two types of stories you cover. So you either cover, it's actually called on diary stories, so these would be like it could be events that are happening, conferences, it could be big government debates in Parliament or whatever, and that's all on the diary. So that's your on diary stuff. So you're always like planning ahead, and you might be working on stories, it might be March and you might be working on a story for like July or August. The famous thing is if like you work on a women's magazine or something, and during the summertime they're probably working on their Christmas issue. So it's very much about you're working quite a bit ahead, but then you've also got that room to be responsive, and you have to be responsive. So you might put a story together and then a big breaking news story happens, and then suddenly you've got to turn around to drop what you were doing and then turn around to 2,000 word piece on something completely different. So I was very used to this, I suppose it's the interaction between big picture planning and the kind of small, more responsive planning. And I found that when I went out and then I started to create content for my business, so in a sense I was like running my own publishing house, if you like, and I was seeing other people really struggling with this because they just couldn't work out what they should be publishing and when they should be posting it. And this thing that seemed so natural to me, so I would look across my year, have a podcast, it goes out every Friday, and I'd look across my year and I'd be like, okay, well, that's happening then, so that means I need to do a podcast episode then about that, and I'm going to be launching that then, and so that means that needs to go there. And it was just instinctive to me. My editor used to say, why do people need to hear about this now? So we couldn't publish anything, we couldn't write anything unless there was a hook, we'd call it. So there needed to be a reason. So it might, it could be something that's on the diary, it could be something that's breaking news that's just happened, but you just don't put content out just for the sake of it.
Right.
It's all quite strategic, and it's about what people, and so much now is obviously influenced by social media, what people are talking about at particular times, what's trending, and that felt like the most natural thing in the world to me. And things like we weren't really allowed, because I worked for the Guardian mainly, they thought that awareness days were kind of frivolous, like silly ones like National Hat Day or whatever, but more serious ones like Miscarriage Awareness Week or Cancer Awareness Week or whatever, we would do things, and Movember, like trendy campaigns that came along. And I just noticed that was so natural to me to work that way, and it meant I never had problems with content. I just understood what I should be publishing, when I should be publishing it. I also had a sense of how far ahead. So I'd be like, okay, well, if I'm publishing that, if I'm launching that thing, then I need to be like making sure that I've got that bit going out there, but I just saw other people struggling. So in the way that most of my ideas happen, I was just there one day like, wouldn't it be really good if there was like a diary that you could have on your desk and it had all these awareness dates on, and you could also kind of sit, because I quite like to plan visually. So I would draw out in my notebook, I would draw like basically like monthly calendars. I don't know why I didn't buy them, but I used to just draw them in my A4 notebook, because I liked that, being able to see a whole month, or I liked sometimes to get like 3 months, a quarter, and like put them out on the desk and look at how the different things interacted with each other. And so I could see that I was able to kind of thinking, months and quarters and look quite a long way ahead compared to other people. And that meant I was kind of on it, in a way that other people weren't, even though day to day, other people might be much better at me. I'm quite consistent, but they might be much better at being detailed and, not leaving things to the last minute. But I got this idea for a planner. And in the first year, I think I sold 500 copies, a few hundred copies the first year. And in year on year, it's got bigger. We now sell thousands of copies, and I also have like a membership program to go with it, because I worked out quite early on that for some people the diary wasn't enough. They also needed the accountability and the support and the help and how to use it. And it's just kind of grown from there. But it really was about this whole being able to kind of, I always think about it like zooming out, like you're a videographer and you can zoom out across the whole year. What I think a lot of people do with planning, content planning in particular, is they just sit down and like, okay, January the 1st, January the 2nd, January, and by January the 6th, they're bored senseless and suddenly content, but the way I encourage people to do it, and I have a section at the beginning of my diary, is like actually just break it into quarters. Okay, right, what are the key things that are happening in the first quarter of the year, the second, the third? Okay, well, let's put one piece of content down for like once a week. Okay, now we've got 12 pieces of content. Now we've got January to March all planned out. Okay, let's do the next one. Okay, so now we've got April to June. And I've taught that out to like thousands of people, and it's a bit of a light bulb moment, because I think people tend to start like on page 1, or they tend to start on page, like on January the 1st or January the 2nd, or but whenever they're starting, the beginning of the month. Whereas I just prefer to kind of see the whole thing, and then it's almost like you zoom in and you zoom in and you zoom in. When it gets to the zoomed in bits, I'd hold my hands up and say I'm probably not so brilliant on the zoomed in bits. But the fact that I've done that big picture planning means I can get away with it.
Right.
Because I've got that structure and framework in place. So, if things were a little bit rushed and busy at times, it's okay, because at least it's all planned out. I've got a whole year's worth, I run a membership site. I've got a whole year's worth of classes and courses. It's all on the diary. It's all there. And that, I think, gives you that flexibility. If something comes up, you can be more responsive if you have an overall framework that you're working in.
Well, and it's kind of like building a house to a degree, right? Like, you're not going to put the furniture and put the other stuff, the details in first. You're going to build a house. You're going to frame it. You're going to do all that stuff. And because otherwise you won't know where that stuff needs to go, or you're going to be doing things in the wrong order. And when you're looking at the year, even just outside of the framing of content, people have a general idea of what like special days are for them, right? Like, so for example, the holidays, like Christmas, you kind of have a sense of what you're going to be doing in and around that time of year, right? So if you look ahead and you plan that out, then you're going in with and there's that quote by Eisenhower that says, when I go into battle, I find planning to be useful, but plans useless, right? Like the idea of saying, okay, I've got this, and then it doesn't mean you can't change your mind. It just means what you've done is you've given yourself a starting point, right?
Yeah. And one of the really interesting things is when I started teaching this planning process, and now I know it happens, so I anticipate it and I have loads of content to help. But some personality types, I suppose I'm quite a creative, big picture thinker, but I would say, I don't know if you've ever come across the entrepreneurial superpowers as one of those sort of personality tests that you can do. So I'm like, as creative as I get, I'm the star. So I'm like, big picture ideas, like, but need help crossing the I's and the T's and the detail. But I've noticed there's other types of personality. I think they're like mechanics, and the other one's lords, I think they are. And you can literally see the stress on their face, because they'll say, they say two things. So first of all, they'll say, but I can't possibly tell you what I'm going to be doing in September or October because I don't know. And I'm like, seriously? You don't know? Like, you've got a business and you don't know what you're going to be selling? I mean, you might at least know that you're going to be doing a Christmas promotion or, Halloween or whatever, like obvious stuff. And they'll also say, but what if I change my mind? And I think that's the other thing, is that you need to be comfortable with, okay, my friend Osman Sharif, I don't know if you know him.
I met at Sorted. I think we met at Sorted.
Yeah, so he has this great phrase that he uses, which is just apply your best thinking right now. And I think it's just such a good phrase to use. It's like, okay, well, maybe something else will happen and maybe your plans will change, but it's much easier to adapt a plan or a framework and say, okay, well, we're going to move that to another day, or we're just going to shift that around, than to be starting from scratch every single week or every single month or every single day. It's much easier to kind of just go and and that's what we were doing on a newspaper. So you would have all this stuff kind of planned in, and then you might be going in and swapping things around, or, big breaking news story might happen and you might have to move something around. But having that structure in place meant it's much easier to move something and tweak it a little bit than it is to completely start from scratch. And I think just not thinking that if you kind of make a plan for a whole year or a whole season or a whole quarter or whatever, that, you're not locked into it. You can move it around. I mean, I was chatting, I don't know also if you've come across Jordan Gill, who has the Systems Save Me podcast. I love her stuff because she's the complete antithesis of me. Like, she's just so organized and productive. But we were having this conversation about how people will often say, for example, if you have a podcast, well, I couldn't possibly, because she records two batches of video a year, like 6 months at a time.
Wow.
And of course, the question a lot of people would have is like, well, what if something happens like COVID, or what if something happens like Black Lives Matter? And I was saying to her, we were chatting about this on this podcast interview, I was like, well, the way that I record my podcasts is that I have the episode on its own, and then I record the episode number because I say the number on mine, and then I do the intro, and then I have an outro. So, if I recorded 12 weeks of podcast episodes and something changed and I thought, I can't put that one out now, or something came along and it was I needed to swap it around for some reason, all I would need to do is just to record a new intro, which would take me 2 minutes, and I could just send it back over to my editor. But I think we give ourselves excuses not to do this. We'll say, yes, but what if I change my mind? Or what if some big world event comes along? Or what if, I don't know, but we'll give ourselves all of these reasons why we can't think big like that. But actually, when I was chatting about with Jordan, it was like, well, yeah, if that happened, you just record a new intro, just take 2 minutes. It's much quicker than starting from scratch.
Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today. And now let's take a break from my conversation with Janet to talk about our sponsors. I have to say that Text Expander hasn't just supercharged myself, but it's supercharged my team. There's a real power with Text Expander, a productivity power that is undeniable. Your team can do so much more with the same resources thanks to Text Expander. There's less repetition, fewer errors, and a greater consistency that will have your team feeling like they've hopped off a bicycle and into a Ferrari, or whatever your sports car analogy of choice might be in this instance. You keep your team consistent, accurate, and current with Text Expander. I know I do that with my team. You can do the same for yours. You share your text and images with the whole staff to keep them on track, and that way everyone will share the same message and give the same answers to all customer questions. This is a huge time saver, and it's consistent and sustainable. There's no better definition than when it comes to productivity than that. You work faster, you work smarter, And when you use TextExpander's powerful shortcuts and abbreviations to streamline and speed up everything you type, it's a real game changer. You can create powerful snippets to save you time, so all you type is a short abbreviation, and then TextExpander does the rest of the typing for you. You can keep your whole team communicating efficiently and with consistent, there's that word again, language. Share your snippets of messaging, signatures, and descriptions with everyone who works on projects with you, and you can do so on the Mac, on a Windows machine, via Chrome, on your iPhone, and on your iPad. TextExpander has been a part of my productivity toolkit for years, and you should make it a part of yours. All you need to do to get 20% off your first year is visit textexpander.com/podcast to sign up and learn more about TextExpander. Again, visit textexpander.com/podcast and then choose the Productivityist podcast from the drop-down menu, and you'll get 20% off your first year, and you will be obliterated and delighted by what TextExpander can do for you, your productivity, and your team's productivity as well. I'd like to thank TextExpander for sponsoring this episode of the podcast, and I want you to take advantage of what they're offering right now. Again, visit textexpander.com/podcast and get 20% off your first year today. You know, I've always had a hard time dealing with social media ads, whether it's Facebook ads, Instagram, Google ads, all of these. It's just been a mystery to me. And that's why I'm glad I've found Otis. Otis is a digital marketing assistant to help target, optimize, and measure campaigns for entrepreneurs like me and like you, as well as small business owners. You can acquire new customers that will love your business, all from an easy-to-use app. And once I hear app, I kind of lean in a little bit harder. Now, you can create Facebook, Instagram, and Google ads all from the Otis app. Otis's AI technology intuitively optimizes your daily budget to whichever platform is performing best. So you don't even have to think about where the money goes. Otis knows where to put it. And using the data that's already available to you, Otis will analyze your existing customers to retarget and find other people like them to target your ads too. So again, it's not exactly a set it and forget it, but it's pretty darn close. Otis can help you get started by creating custom templates for you based on analyzing your point of sale, website data, and available inventory. You can manage and track results all in real time right from the Otis app, and Otis users see results for as little as, get this, $10 per day. Do you have an online store? Do you use Shopify? If so, then Meet Otis is exactly what you need. Meet Otis helps plenty of online retailers every day through Shopify. So if you're using Shopify, you definitely want to lean into what Meet Otis has to offer. If you're ready to supercharge your online advertising, then get started with Otis today. Otis is offering listeners of the Productivityist podcast a 14-day free trial plus $50 in ad credit. But to make this happen, you need to go to meetotis.com/timecrafting to take advantage of this offer. That's meetotis, meetotis.com/timecrafting to get your 14-day free trial plus a $50 credit to get started. What are you waiting for? Make it happen now. meetotis.com/timecrafting. Do that right now. What are you waiting for? Visit meetotis.com/timecrafting. Get that 14-day free trial. Get that $50 credit to get started today. If you're anything like me, you likely have some monthly subscriptions that you need to take care of. And there's a few that you're going to want to make sure that happen every single time and that are indispensable to you. Well, I'm going to share with you one that's truly indispensable to me, and I know it'll be the same for you. It's called SetApp. SetApp is an incredible service, one that's on a mission to help users get more done. You see, with SetApp, there's no more worrying about having to search for apps to solve a problem, because with SetApp, you can get high-quality apps for every single task. SetApp curates and recommends the right apps for you so you can focus on what you're supposed to do, which is your work. You can quickly find and select the most effective apps you need for your tasks, both the ones you do every day and the ones you do, every so often, maybe once in a blue moon. But that's not just what SetApp can do for you, because what SetApp can do is make you feel more empowered. As a SetApp user, you'll feel more confident that you're spending time on your tasks. You'll have the right apps at your disposal. So you'll be more productive, you'll get more done, and you'll spend more time doing what you enjoy. With SetApp, you can think about your tasks and not apps. What I love about SetApp is, among other things, they have over 200 high-quality apps for your Mac and for your iPhone all in one place. There's an app for almost any task, so you can stay in your flow and finish what you started. And the other thing is, SetApp has a dedicated curation team that only selects the highest quality apps, so you don't have to search for the best tools anymore. They're already there in SetApp. And it's an incredible value. Instead of paying thousands of dollars for separate licenses, there's just one flat monthly fee. And new apps are added to SetApp regularly. Updates are free, and all the apps are full-featured pro versions. So again, when that renewal notice came up, I didn't hesitate. I made sure that SetApp was taken care of. And again, it's an incredible value. You want to try SetApp? You do right now. You want to be part of the SetApp revolution like I am. So head over to setapp.com to try SetApp free for a week. And if you like SetApp, then plans start at, wait for it, $9.99 per month. That's it. And you can use SetApp for as long as it's useful for you. And I just told you, I have renewed again and again and again. I'm a monthly subscriber to SetApp, and I'm confident you'll be the same once you put SetApp through the paces. So go to setapp.com, SETAPP.com right now and try SetApp for free for a week. You'll be glad you did. And now let's get back to my conversation with Janet Murray here on the Productivityist podcast. Well, and I mean, I run across this with my podcast before we started chatting. I told you how far ahead we were. And one of the things that I've done, and this is again, you got to find your just right. Like I call this the Goldilocks factor. Like if it's too soft, like it's too vague, then it means that you basically have so much space that you may have a hard time making a decision based on that. So like, for example, what was happening is I had, if you have, like, for example, I have episodes recorded all the way till September, right? Which is great. Like everyone I talked to, like, that's a lot of episodes. Like you're good for the next, several months. Most people only have a month or two and that's considered good. And so, but for me, that it was almost like too, if I didn't have that, then I'd be like, okay, where can these things go? It was too soft. And then there's the opposite of that, which is too hard, like too narrow. So if I'm like, okay, I have these episodes recorded also September, and here are the dates that they go on, and that's the way it is. But like, to your point, what if something comes up? Like I had an interview with Annie Duke, the week that we're recording this, and there was something mentioned in that episode that was so timely. Yes, it could be timeless too, but it was just so perfect for that week. I'm like, I need to move that up. But if I was stuck in that, like, nope, this episode is scheduled to go at this time, then I would be not only like restricting my creativity, because that's what it was. I'm like, oh man, this is like the juices were going, but also I wouldn't necessarily be doing my audience the greatest service either, because the passion in that interview and that the way that interview went down, I felt was like a really solid one that needed to get out there now, right? So you have to kind of play with it and find your just right. And I've been doing that with the podcast recently to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have so many that are locked in, but like maybe a month's worth. But if something comes along, I do have some room to move things around. But because I have all these episodes recorded, that should be a freeing thing as opposed to a restrictive thing, right? So there is like these biases and these nuances, like, oh, there's no way I have time for this, or I'm not much of a planner, or I like to be really organic with my social media, so I like to do it when it suits. But you could do that anyway, right? Like you could have the stuff planned out, and if you want to throw something extra in there, okay, right? But we just think in these restrictive terms, which often don't serve us, right?
Yeah, totally. And it was interesting on this podcast interview I did with Jordan Gill. She was talking about how Seth Godin was talking about how people prefer consistency to authenticity.
Yeah.
Which I just thought was fascinating. I keep meaning to listen to episode, but I totally got, when she was telling me the story, I totally got it. And she was kind of saying that, that's why people love things like Starbucks, because that if you buy a caramel latte in Texas, it's going to be the same as it is in North Kent in the UK where I live. And whether or not you like Starbucks or not, but there is something about that consistency.
There's a certain,
what you're going to get.
Yeah, there's a certainty. People love certainty, and especially like in the midst of what we're doing right now. Like, I mean, we are recording this in the middle of, is it the middle? We don't know. We're in a pandemic right now as we're recording this, which has so much uncertainty that people are trying to engineer it wherever they can. So the familiarity factor is huge right now for people. They just want to find like, okay, good. McDonald's. I know that I like eating. McDonald's has food. It's consistent, like you said. Wherever you go, wherever you live in the world, I'm gonna get this McDonald's because it's this and this and this. Same thing with Starbucks. So certainty is we want that, right? We crave that, but we also need uncertainty too as humans, right? And that otherwise we're not really being human, right? We're drifting too far in one direction. But I didn't mean to cut you off, but it was just one of those things where I've heard like it's true. And Seth is really consistent. Like he puts out a daily blog post and has for, over a decade now, I think. But it's not like I look at those blog posts and go, well, he just manufactured this one. Like there is that layer there. I think he's found that balance, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this year, I've been doing a daily email. I started off doing it every single day. And actually then I decided just to do weekdays because it's tough, just like show it. But there is something about showing up in people's inboxes every day and that kind of people expecting you to be there. And I think when people struggle with consistency with content, for example, it's just often such a simple thing. It's like, I haven't decided what day my podcast goes out, because the minute you say my podcast goes out on a Friday and we have it live by 7 a.m. and you don't need many listeners for people to start to pick that up.
Yep.
And if your podcast is ever late, or, I've had the very odd occasion where we've had a technical hitch where it's been late, or I've messed it up if I've been doing it, if my podcast editor isn't around. And people will email and they'll say, where is it? Like, I was looking forward to it. And this is the thing as well, is that particularly if you're looking to, again, this is particularly true for business owners and content creators, is that like you become part of somebody's routine. So people will say to me, having done a podcast every Friday for 5 years, people will say, I save your podcast up for my Friday morning run, or I save it for when I'm doing a nasty cleaning job that I don't like, or I save it for when I'm driving the kids to school or whatever. That's really powerful if you can become part of somebody's routine. And again, for me, it all comes back to this newspaper thing, because I mean, that's what newspapers do, don't they? They have the Sunday Times here in the UK, they have a couple of regular slots that they've had for so many years, a day in the life and relative values. And you literally open it to go to those articles. And it's that certainty, that kind of security. And obviously around that, there's flexibility and there's, with newspapers and magazines, there isn't that much room for wiggle room, and that's actually something quite good about it. Because I used to say as well, like when you're working on newspaper or magazine, you're just it's like you're filling holes or filling buckets, and each week you know what bucket, what's got to go in the bucket, you know what shape the bucket is, and you know what size it is, but you're just putting something in it slightly different, and that makes it so much easier to plan. And I think it's the same with your, when you create a content plan, or if you know that you've committed to doing, like I mentioned, you can very quickly have a whole year's worth of blog posts or podcast episodes planned out, literally just by writing down 50 questions that your ideal customers or clients ask you, and then sort of thinking, well, when would be a good time to run this? Like, how would that fit in with something that I'm doing or selling or promoting? And when you start to look at it like that, it's a little bucket that I have to fill every Friday or something. Suddenly it all just becomes a lot easier. And just looking at it like that, and almost looking at things in verticals, if that makes sense, rather than if you think about trying to plan a month worth of content or a week, that's a lot of boxes you've got to fill. But if you think, I'm just going to think about every week. I'm just going to think about, one thing I'm going to put out every week on a Friday. Suddenly that feels less overwhelming. Does that kind of make sense?
Totally. I mean, that's why New Year's resolutions fail, right? Because people like think about the whole year. I got to do this every day for 365 days. That becomes immediately your brain goes, that seems like a lot of work. That's really daunting. Where if you said, like when I talk about monthly themes, like what if you could do something for 30 days? Could you make that happen? And yes, you don't have to do it every month, but and I mean, you talk about buckets, the days are buckets. When you think about it, like a calendar is a frame, right? Like you look in your planner, like it's a grid, that there's a framing device around it. That's what time is. Time is a frame, right? So Friday bucket for content, your content could be your to-do list. Like these are the things that will fit in that bucket today. Is this the right day for them to go into this bucket? So like this kind of stuff is really transferable. So is this, and I don't know if I've ever told you, but I used to do one of the first things I did when I worked online was I did news, like digital news. So I worked for the Next Web, which has a real presence in Europe. I was the Canada and apps editor. So my job was to have news stories that were related to the apps that were out there, but also they wanted me to cover all of Canada. And I said, well, I'm not going to be able to go to all of Canada because we have 5 time zones and every part of Canada, it'd be like going to a different country. Every province has kind of got its own little cultural and nuance to it. But, and then I did stuff for Cult of Mac, and it was the difference between those sites is oftentimes there was a mixture of being alert and being aware, right? Like if some big news story broke, like I had to have 2 screens open, one that had like the Twitter feed going that I think was called Newsbreak or News Desk or something, that you could see like what was coming up the wire. And I was like, oh man, it got to, at first it was exciting, right? Oh good, I get to report this. And the idea of those tech news sites, and I'm sure it was the same in traditional journalism because that's where the roots come from, but we want to be the first one to break this story. We want to be the first one. So, but eventually become about being first as opposed to being accurate, because on digital sites, you can fix things fairly quickly. So you can go, oh, update, we screwed this up. This is what was actually said. But that got draining because to be constantly alert which is basically being reactive, is so hard because you're not designed, like we're just not designed for it. But the awareness dates, which I love, being aware, there's a difference there. It's like there's a proactivity. It's almost like, okay, I'm aware this is coming up. How do I deal with it? Like awareness dates. I go to daysoftheyear.com a lot to get ideas for content. Like what should this week's content? Oh, this is pretend to be a time traveler day. Okay, that falls this week. I might want to write about that or allude to it in my content. But if I just found out about that like the day of and wrote the content the day of, it would remind me of those reactive, being alert kind of days that I was dealing with when I was working for the net, which is why I didn't last. The stories I enjoyed writing for them, honestly, were the pieces that were like, okay, Mike, you need to craft like a longer piece that's about this, and it took time and it was crafted well. But those alert ones, those ones that were like, this is just coming down the wire, get it out there, it drove me absolutely insane. And again, that I can see that happening outside of the news cycle as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when it comes to content planning, things like the awareness days, I think a lot of it's about patterns as well. So if you can like take this wide view of your whole year, you start to see patterns and connections, which I find quite exciting. Mm-hmm. And you start to see the way that and you also start to see shortcuts. So for example, when we were doing our I got together with my team to look at the first quarter. Like, by the way, I wouldn't actually recommend that you do your 52 weekly ideas. I recommend you do a quarter at a time, do a yearly plan, right, and just do a quarter at a time. So we were doing the first quarter and just looking for 12 or 13 ideas for podcasts and people we could line up to interview. And so International Women's Day is one of the dates, and the podcast doesn't fall on International Women's Day, I don't think, this year, but it's kind of near it. And we've got this fab recording from 2021 Sorted, the event that you spoke at of mine last year, about with women talking about podcasting. We had a session that was women in podcasting, and it was brilliant. So why don't we just take that and put it out? And it's March, I think it's March the 18th or something. Why don't we take that? So we knew that in December. We were talking about that episode in March, and we've already got the recordings. So that means we can get it like all set up. And it's going to be timely and relevant, because that's, what I was talking about earlier, like, why do people need to hear about this now? But I also think when you could take that bigger picture in the wide shot, you start to go, oh, well, maybe I could combine with that that with that, or maybe I don't need to create that new because actually I did that last year, and maybe we could just update that blog post, or maybe we could just change the intro. Like, so you also start to see ways that you can save yourself time, just because you're looking at the bigger picture. You're not kind of going day by day.
Well, and to that end, I guess this happened with this podcast episode and these series of podcast episodes that I teased during the Big Ready week. My initial plan, Janet, was to release full episodes that week. So I was going to have like 7 episodes for that entire week. And then I thought, wait a minute, wouldn't it be better just to do like the tease, like 5-minute little snippets of the episode? Because the purpose of those episodes, the teasers, is not only to introduce people to you and Gary and Steven and some of the people appearing at the Big Ready, but really ultimately it was to get people excited to buy tickets to the Big Ready. And then I thought, well, if I do that, then I've got 6 additional episodes that are full that are for use later in the year. And I'll ask the guests when they'd like them to come out, and we'll read. And it literally, like, to your point, it became exciting because now not only am I like, I'm doing something a bit different, I'm saving myself time, I'm capitalizing on the content that I'm creating and making it, giving it a longer shelf life, right? Like I'm doubling my output without having necessarily any additional quote effort or time spent on it. And there's something, like you said, there's something exhilarating about that by figuring out those problems. But you can only really do that when you sit down and actually think about it and get out of the doing and checking off boxes and just go, okay, wait a minute. Like you have those, you mentioned like by January 6th, people run out of content. You have those epiphanies, right? Because January 6th, you have those kind of epiphanies that show up and go, oh, this would be much better for me, not just for my content, but for the other types of content and the other plans I have in place, because now I'm freeing up 6 weeks worth of episode content for my podcast that I can devote to written, or I can devote to building a course, or devote to my membership, or devote to whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it brings to mind another example from Jordan Gill, who I've mentioned several times. He's great on sort of productivity around content and saving time on content creation. But she has the whole of December is replays. So she replays the top 4 episodes during the year. So, I mean, that's great, isn't it? If you know that you've got a weekly podcast, but actually you only need to put it out 11 months of the year because you're going to do your best episodes, which your listeners are probably going to appreciate because they've probably missed some of the best ones or would like to listen to them again. I mean, again, that's the benefit. And I saw that and I was like, do you know what? I'm going to do that next year. That seems like a great idea. But again, that's not the kind of thing, if you decide to do that kind of thing on December the 2nd and it's all a bit of a rush, which I've certainly been there,
Yeah.
You live and learn. But I think taking this bigger picture look at your content and across your year, like I say, you see connections, you see patterns, you see shortcuts, you see ways of making your life easier and saving time. And even like one of the things that I've done this year, I think you will appreciate this, Mike, but I've, I think really from being inspired actually from the first time that I heard you talk at Tropical Think Tank, but I keep my mornings free until 12 o'clock and have done for a few years now, because I realize I'm much more productive in the morning and I get very easily distracted. So I need big blocks of time to work on content. But actually I've arranged my whole year this year. So I get a week off. The last week of the month is completely free with no clients, so that's meant rearranging my whole business in a way. No clients, no coaching, no calls, no Zoom calls at all, just so that I can have a whole week to go deep on content creation, which I believe is a good example of time crafting, isn't it?
It is, definitely.
But again, having that big picture has allowed me to do that. If I was just going from day to day, week to week, I wouldn't have been able to make that work.
So I'm going to, interestingly enough, I'm going to link to Jordan's podcast because you mentioned Jordan a few times, but also, I mean, you've had her on your show, so I'm going to link to that. But also, fellow Big Ready presenter Stephen Worley's had Jordan on his show. So lots of Jordan in this, which is great. I've subscribed to her podcast now too, because I think that I think we definitely have a lot to talk about her and I think we'd be definitely have some kinship there. Before I let you go, Janet, I want to ask you, what is one simple action that someone can take that's listening to this right now that can allow them to start to think more about the big picture planning so that they can really, use that and leverage that so they can have a greater impact on, not oddly enough, but fittingly enough in the day-to-day.
It's that year thing. So I have a template inside the front of the diary. It's a really simple thing. You can draw it out on an A4 pad, which is what I used to do. And just divide your year into quarters and visually just put it and go, okay, like 2 or 3 things. If you have a business, what am I going to be doing in my business? Like, what am I going to be selling? Where am I going to be? Am I traveling? Am I speaking? If you don't have a business, just things that are going on in your life that are going to need your attention. And that in itself, and then when that question comes up, if it comes up of, well, I don't know. Well, if you have a business, why don't you know? That's go and do a bit of business planning. But that whole thing in itself, and then saying, okay, well, could I just sit down and think of, because you can take one idea, like one blog post, one podcast, and you could repurpose that and turn it into smaller bits of content you could run for the whole week. And even if you did nothing else, if you put out one piece of content a week, a blog, a podcast, and you did that consistently every year because you sat down and you came up with 12 ideas. I mean, we can all come up with 12 ideas, can't we? Mm-hmm. In relation to our business. Think how much further you'd be along than if you started to do content planning in the first week of January. You tried to post one blog post a week, 6 social media posts, 3. But if you just did that one thing, like you just looked at your year, divided it into quarters, had to think about what your focus was going to be for each quarter, tried to come up with 12 relevant ideas, then that in itself would move you forward quite a bit.
Janet, this has been great. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today on the podcast. Where can people keep up with you and the work you're doing?
Best place to find me is my website, which is janetmurray.co.uk. And I'm also very active on Instagram. So if you head over to Janet Murray UK, you can find me there.
Janet Murray, thanks again for joining me on the Productivityist podcast. So now you've got some tools, some tactics, some tips to do some big picture planning, whether it's for your content or, as I mentioned earlier, for other areas of your life, whether it's filling those buckets with the things that you need to do on a daily basis, or transferring that from, say, content to tasks or to-do lists. You've got a lot of ammunition to leave with today, and I'm really happy that Janet was able to take the time to join us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. I mean, Janet has been on the show. There was a quick teaser of her when she appeared at the Big Ready, but we've got lots of people that have been on the program. Whether it's Seth Godin, who we alluded to earlier in the episode, lots of great guests that have been on the show in the past, as well as some great guests going forward. So wherever you are listening to this podcast, just hit that subscribe button, and that way you won't miss a single episode. That's it for this time. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. It's me, Mike Vardy, the Productivityist, reminding you to stop guessing and start going. See you later.